On this episode of RevHang, Ben and I talk about the 2 MotoGP races, 4 IMSA races, and 2 IndyCar races that we've missed over the past couple weeks. Let's do it. Hello everybody and welcome to RevHang. I'm your host, Nathan Nevue, and alongside me today is my fellow Class C driver's license owner and co-host, Ben Bagley. How's it going, Ben?
It's great. I just dropped some money on a motorcycle. We're getting towards the tail end of summer, so I'm running out of room to ride it, but I'm excited to save a little bit of money and maybe go on some adventures.
Nice. I know you were talking about that a little bit last episode. Did you get your certification?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I got a brand new picture for my license, and I am ready to channel my inner Rossi on the roads.
Fun stuff. Well, congrats on that. But let's just dive into today's episode. This is a 2-parter for all you people listening. Part 1 is going to be about IndyCar, MotoGP, and the IMSA races that have happened over the past couple of weeks. And then Part 2 will be a mid-season review of the 2022 Formula 1 season. We split it into 2 parts because I anticipate Part 1 being long and very hard to listen to.
Yep, very dense.
So it's a lot of information and stats and positions and stuff like that, like we normally do. So if that doesn't really interest you, you just want to hear about the Formula 1 stuff, you're more than welcome to skip to part 2. I will not be offended. All right, let's start with MotoGP.
Okay.
The first race that we had over the past couple of weeks was the British Grand Prix. They just came off of their summer break. So they had a few weeks off, but MotoGP is now back. So for qualifying for the British Grand Prix, we'll just go over the top 10 for context. It was Johann Zarco, followed by Maverick Vinales, Jack Miller, Fabio Quartararo, Francesco Bagnaia, Aleix Espargaro, Marco Bezzecchi, Enea Bastianini, Jorge Martin, and Luca Marini, rounding off the top 10. All right. So in the race, Quartararo had a great launch into turn 1, which jumped him up to second place. Unfortunately, he had a long lap penalty to serve as punishment for a collision with Aleix Espargaro in the last race. So he actually dropped down to 5th after the long lap. One thing I find interesting about the long laps in MotoGP is they're really not that much longer, but because of the low spread in the sport, it's like it drops you like 3 positions, even though you only lose maybe a second of time on track.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild stuff. But moving on, Alex Rins fought his way up to 3rd over the first few laps. On lap 5, Johann Zarco crashed out while leading the race, sending Jack Miller and Alex Rins through to 1st and 2nd. This is not the first time Zarco's crashed out of the lead, and he is still going to be chasing that elusive first win. On lap 6, Alex Rins made a move on Jack Miller to take the lead of the race, and then Bagnaia passed Miller on the next lap to take 2nd. As the laps wound by, Bagnaia slowly closed the gap and eventually passed Alex Rins on lap 12 to take the lead of the race. Miller was able to make his way back through to pass Rins on lap 14. On lap 15, Joan Mir slid out into the gravel and ended his race. Another DNF for Joan Mir. Not fun for him. Rins started to fall back through the field since he used up his tires early on. He went with a softer compound on the front, I believe, and so it just fell away from him at the end of the race. With just 3 laps to go, Maverick Vinales made his way past Jack Miller for 2nd place. And then Vinales and Bagnaia battled for the lead over the last 2 laps of the race, with Bagnaia coming out on top after Vinales made a couple of small mistakes. So, the finishing order for the British Grand Prix in MotoGP, we'll go first 5 were Francesco Bagnaia, Maverick Vinales, Jack Miller, Enea Bastianini, and Jorge Martin. 6 through 10 were Miguel Oliveira, Alex Rins, Fabio Quartararo, Aleix Espargaro, and Marco Bezzecchi. 11 through 15 were Brad Binder, Luca Marini, Taka Nakagami, Paul Espargaro, and Franco Morbidelli. 16 through 20 were Andrea Dovizioso, Alex Marquez, Remy Gardner, Stefan Bradl, and Darren Binder. And then 21st and 22nd were Ralph Fernandez and Fabio Di Gianantonio. And then our 2 DNFs were Joan Mir and Johan Zarco.
Joan Mir's getting pretty comfortable in that DNF position.
Yep, and it doesn't get much better.
Not that I'm skipping ahead into the script or anything, but...
Yeah, unfortunately. So do you want to take over for Austria, Ben?
I would
the
love
next
to.
MotoGP race?
Yeah, so we had, for qualifying, and your first top 5 places, we had Enea Bastianini, Francesco Bagnaia, Jack Miller, Jorge Martin, and Fabio Quartararo, who recently, wasn't he just driving around in a Mercedes F1 car here pretty recently too?
I don't know about that. I haven't heard anything about that, but I don't doubt it. He is affiliated with Monster, and Monster is one of Mercedes' primary sponsors, so I would not be surprised.
Huh. Yeah, anyways, that was a little tangent that I thought of. But just talking through some notable points during the race, we had another Joan Mir crash out at the beginning of the race. Bastianini also had a problem with his bike that forced him out before even getting to lap 7. The Ducatis took a pretty good size lead early on in the race, as they're usually wont to do. And we had Elias Espargaro struggle pretty much throughout the race. His bike didn't seem very well set up for this particular track. And that allowed Quartararo to make his way up to the leaders, having a scrap with Miller and Bagnaia. They ended up changing hands a whole bunch, but it ended up with Bagnaia finishing first, and then followed by Fabio Quartararo. You had Jack Miller, Luca Marini, I'm so sorry. Johan Zarco, and Elias Espargaro in 6th. 7th, we had Brad Binder, and then followed by Alex Rins, Marco Bezzecchi, Jorge Martin, Fabio Di Gianantonio, Miguel Oliveira, and then 13th we had Maverick Vinales. Wait, is his name really Maverick? Have I not noticed that the entire time?
Yes, his name's Maverick.
That's incredible. Anyways, 14th we had Alex Marquez, followed by Andrea.
I don't know. It's probably Andrea. I don't know.
Dovizioso. Oh man.
Yeah.
This is why I usually do this stuff.
Yeah, I've gotten used to it by now.
Pol Espargaro, Stefan Bradl, Raul Fernandez, Lorenzo Savadori, and rounding out 20th in the finishers is Remy Gardner. And then we had 5 DNFs. We had Morbidelli, Binder, Nakagami, Bastianini, and the previously mentioned Mir.
Yep. All right. So those were the 2 MotoGP races that we've missed in the last couple of weeks. Let's just go over the championship standings real quick. Now it seems like as good a time as ever to do it. Fabio Quartararo is in a fairly comfortable lead. At the top of the tables, he has a 32-point lead over Elias Espargaro in 2nd place. I don't know. There's still quite a few races left. I don't know the exact number, but I think it's a good 7 or 8. So there's still a lot of time for Espargaro to close that gap. Quartararo just takes one or 2 DNFs and Espargaro having good results to put him right back up in the fight.
Yeah.
So with Quartararo in 1st, Espargaro in 2nd, and then Bagnaia in 3rd with 156 points. I would say anyone in the top 3 still has a good shot at the title, but Quartararo does have a nice little cushion there for now. Not much else super notable. Joan Mir's down in 12th. He's had so many DNFs this year. And Alex Rins is actually in 8th, and he's also had a lot of DNFs. But when he does finish, he finishes pretty high. Which I guess is a good thing. All right. Moving on to IMSA. IMSA. All right. We have missed the last 4 races in the IMSA category. Just figured we'd get them all out of the way kind of at the mid-season review episode. So that's what we're doing. So bear with us. There's quite a few names coming up here. We'll just kind of zoom through the races, go through the highlights a little bit, We're not going to spend too long on these. But the first race was at Watkins Glen in New York. It was a 6 hour and 10-minute race. In first place in the DPI class was Ricky Taylor and Philippe Albuquerque. In first place in the LMP2 class was Ben Keating, Mikkel Jensen, and Scott Huffaker. In LMP3, first place went to Gare Robinson, Felipe Fraga, and Kay Van Berlo. First place in the GTD Pro class was Ross Gunn and Alex Riveres. And then first place in the GTD class was Roman DeAngelis, Maxime Martin, and Ian James. So for this race, there were quite a few spins into turn 1 throughout. It's kind of treacherous for some reason. It's a big, wide, sweeping right-hander, and I guess a lot of people just lost grip on the rear and spun out. There were 3 or 4 at the same spot on the track. Juan Pablo Montoya and his son Sebastian Montoya were very strong in the LMP2 class, but had a late penalty that set them back, unfortunately. Several LMP3 cars had fiery engine failures. They were actually kind of just going up in flames all over the place, and it was only the LMP3 cars. It was kind of strange.
That's odd.
Yeah. There was an hour-long red flag due to lightning, which will become a recurring theme, generally is at this time of the year. Albuquerque and Blomqvist in the DPI class fought back and forth for most of the race, and most of the GTD class finished in front of the GTD Pro class, and that actually happened a couple times, which surprised me, but at the same time, the GTD drivers aren't amateurs, really. I mean, they're kind of in that class, but they have a lot of experience. That's not all they do.
So only officially amateurs.
Yeah, right, exactly. But a lot of the GTD drivers have just as much experience as the pro drivers, so it's interesting to see the two classes that are mixing like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a fun race.
Yep.
After that, of course, we had the Canadian Tire Motorsport Park race in Bowmanville, Ontario. This is a 2 hour, 40-minute race. And for the results, first place in DPI, we had Renger van der Zand. And Sebastian Bourdais. In LMP3, we had John Bennett and Colin Braun. GTD Pro, first place were Matt Campbell and Matthew Jaminet. And then in GTD, we had Roman DeAngelis and Maxime Martin. Some of the big points from this, we had a big incident right off the bat that sent 2 cars out. Following that, we had a lot of tire failures over the course of the race that got to mix things up, especially over an endurance race. And the GTD and GTD Pro class were once again mixed up together, very close, and fighting for spots. There were quite a few incidents between all the DPI drivers. Pretty aggressive, tight race for them. And not much else. It was a pretty short race, so I don't want to call it routine. We had a pretty big incident in lap 1, but aside from that, it's on to Lime Rock.
Yep. Next up, we have Lime Rock Park in Lakeville, Connecticut. This race was GTD and GTD Pro only, so there were no prototype cars. It was a 2 hour and 40-minute race like the last one. The winners of the GTD Pro class were Matt Campbell and Matthew Jaminet, and the winners of the GTD class were Brian Sellers and Madison Snow. For the highlights of this race, this was actually a pretty uneventful and boring race, if I do say so myself, as we had green flag racing for the first 2 hours of the 2 hour and 40-minute race. Nothing happened, really. And Campbell and Jaminet just ran away with it. They were in front for the whole time, and then after the yellow, they just pulled away and built up a gap again. One notable thing, I don't remember which driver it was, but one of the cars had a damaged hood that flew up in front of his windshield and blocked his view for a couple of laps near the end of the race. And then the marshals, I think, forced him to pit so he could get that fixed, so he's not driving around blind, which, I think is a good idea.
IMSA racers are built different.
Yeah.
They're really they'll lose half their car and continue until they're told to pull over.
Yeah, for sure. It was unfortunate, though, because I believe the guy who it happened to was in second in the GTD class.
Ooh.
And was challenging for the lead of that class, and unfortunately had some door-to-door contact, which crumpled his hood a little bit from the side, and it kind of just caught wind from there and kept peeling up farther and farther. So not ideal when you're racing for the lead, but it's good to stay safe and be able to see where you're trying to go.
Yeah, we've all been there. You're driving Interstate 5 and you go door to door with some guy in a Toyota Corolla, and things happen. Sometimes you get a little damage.
Things happen, yep. All right, so let's move on to Road America.
Yes, this is in Plymouth, Wisconsin, if you weren't familiar. This is another 2-hour, 40-minute race. And again, going through the top first finisher for DPI, we had Ricky Taylor and Felipe Albuquerque. LMP2, we had Dwight Merriman and Ryan Dale. Thank you for putting the pronunciation there.
Yeah.
In LMP3, we had Gar Robinson and Felipe Fraga. GTD Pro, first place with Jack Hawksworth and Ben Barnicoat. And rounding out for GTD in first place, we had Russell Ward and Philip Ellis. So some highlights from this race, we saw Stephen Thomas from LMP2 spin his car, managed to high center it in the gravel when he tried to turn around, and this would just begin the foreboding that would come upon it. About an hour into the race, it started to rain, and positions, of course, as is common in all races, began to swap all over the place at the front of the field. Rain's kind of the great equalizer across races. And at one point, all the prototype cars were on slick tires in the rain, which was a very bold move, Cotton. And the GTD cars on wets ended up being faster, obviously. Grip is king. Barnicoat and Gemini went back and forth throughout the race for a lead of the GTD Pro class. Obviously, we saw Barnicoat come out on top of that one. And then we had 2 LMP3 cars crash without 40 minutes into with 40 minutes into the left of the race. Oh my gosh, sorry. And this, of course, brought out a full caution that shook up the order of DPI, squished everything together, gave people some free pit stops. We saw Felipe Albuquerque put on a great race the entire time. He was just absolutely dive bombing cars, not afraid of going wheel to wheel and bumping people out or even bumping himself out to overtake on the outside of the dirt. So that was pretty entertaining to watch. And then we had the championship leaders, Bourdais and Gervais, went on a long fuel strategy for this race. It didn't pay off. Gervais managed to crash with about 7 minutes left in the race, which is really unfortunate. I was kind of hoping to see how his particular strategy worked out, and ended up completely demolishing the car. But somehow he stayed able to run, and the race ended under yellow while the safety team cleaned up the debris field. So that was a pretty eventful race. I always like seeing rain during these endurance races because you get to play the long game with even different tire strategy than normal, and getting to see all the GTD cars pass all the other cars on slicks was kind of fun.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting race. The weather, it kept raining and then it stopped and then it started again. It was going back and forth and kind of just creating chaos. But yeah, one of the things I wanted to highlight was when Olivier Jarvis crashed his car, I don't even know how he did it, but he spun, went straight headfirst into the wall, destroyed the entire front half of his car, and then basically slid along the track, got his engine running again, and then just trundled around the track with half a car for the last 7 minutes of the race while it was under full course caution. I don't know how he could still drive that car. If you should go look it up on YouTube. It's a miracle that car was still drivable. I don't understand.
The case for mid-engine cars.
Yeah, But I don't like, even with the suspension, like it seemed impossible that car could keep going. But
Yeah, it would have been even better if he was able to go the entire rest of the race.
Yeah. All right, IndyCar. That was it for IMSA. So let's move on to IndyCar. First up, we have the Music City Grand Prix in Nashville, Tennessee. This race was hectic last year, and it did not disappoint this year. Lots of DNFs.
Absolute circus.
We'll get there. But just for context, we'll go through the top 10 in qualifying. First 5 were Scott McLaughlin, Romain Grosjean, Christian Lundgaard, Alex Palou, and Pato O'Ward. And then 6 through 10 were Joseph Newgarden, David Malukas, Will Power, Graham Rahal, and Rinus VeeKay. All right. So, at the beginning of the race, McLaughlin maintained a early lead. Connor Daly and Colton Herta came together early on, sent Herta into the wall and damaged his car. He was able to get back to the pits and keep going, I believe, though. On lap 26, Rahal ran into the back of O'Ward, damaging his gearbox and ending his race, and that brought out a full course caution as well. On lap 33, Alexander Rossi and Callum Ilott ran into each other on the restart, sending both cars into the runoff area. Rossi was able to continue his race, but he dropped to the back of the field. On the same lap, Devlin DeFrancesco and Takuma Sato collided. It was actually just a corner later, and both cars ended up going into the wall, and that was the end of both drivers' races, as I think both cars had pretty bad suspension damage after that. Graham Rahal crashed into the wall on lap 52, and Rinus VeeKay crashed into the back of his car as it was a blind corner, and he had no time to adjust his line to avoid the crashed out car of Rahal. VeeKay was able to continue, but another caution came out. On lap 64, Kyle Kirkwood and David Malukas crashed into each other and both slid into the wall, and that ended both drivers' races, causing yet another full course caution. And that was a shame because Kirkwood and Malukas at that point in the race were, I think, it was like 4th and 5th or something like that. They were
doing
these are two
well.
rookies. Yeah, these are two rookies up at the top of the field. So it was they were both having a really good race, and then they got a little aggressive, and both of them ended up not finishing. But that's how it goes. With just 7 laps left in the race, Jimmy Johnson lost the rear of his car over some bumps and spun into the wall. That ended his race and caused another full course caution. On the restart after that caution, Newgarden and Grosjean collided, and Grosjean ended up in the wall, which brought out the full course caution again. This race took like, how long did this race took like 4 hours, because there was a rain delay at the beginning too. It was wild. So that was the last caution of the race, and then Marcus Ericsson, unfortunately for him, had a mechanical failure under the last caution with just a few laps left.
Because of course.
Yeah. On the last restart, Scott Dixon was in the lead, followed by Scott McLaughlin, Christian Lundgaard, Alex Palou, and Alex Rossi. All 5 drivers were in contention for the win, but it was Dixon and McLaughlin that ended up fighting each other over the remaining 2 laps, and the race ended in a drag race to the finish line with Dixon coming out on top by about half a car length.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting stuff.
Brutal race.
Yeah. All right, so we had 13 finishers and 13 non-finishers. So the top 5 were Scott Dixon, Scott McLaughlin, Alex Palou, Alexander Rossi, and Colton Herta. 6 through 10 were Joseph Newgarden, Felix Rosenqvist, Christian Lundgaard, Simon Pagenaud, and Jack Harvey. And then 11, 12, and 13 were Will Power, Rinus VeeKay, and Helio Castroneves. And then the DNFs.
Everyone else.
DNFs for everybody else. It was Marcus Ericsson, Callum Ilott, Romain Grosjean, Connor Daly, Jimmy Johnson, Kyle Kirkwood, David Malukas, Takuma Sato, Devlin DeFrancesco, Graham Rahal, Pato O'Ward, Dalton Kellett, and Simona De Silvestro. I don't think I've ever seen a race with that many DNFs. I'm not going to lie.
The last time I remember seeing something with a similar kind of finishing order or finishing stack was Hungary last year
Oh yeah,
for F1.
yeah. I think
That was
I think
about
it
half
was,
the field too.
yeah, it was about the same. I think there were 11 or 12 finishers, but yeah, it was. There's a few races where you get like just carnage like this, but this is just insane.
Yeah, yeah, very different circumstances.
Yeah.
Nashville's a very, very tight street race,
Yep.
and it had rained before. The track was still a little wet, and it was just, yeah, it's a high speed over the bridge. They go over the bridge twice, and they come down from the high speed bridge straight into a really, really tight corner that just absolutely mauls people if you're not checking your speed, because it's bumpy too. You're not getting perfect traction when you're braking, so you just saw a lot of people who normally wouldn't crash just getting punished.
Yep. Yeah, it was absolute chaos. Um, but yeah, so that was the Music City Grand Prix. Let's move on to the Bommarito Auto Group 500.
Okay, yeah, this is in good old St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis. Oh no, I pronounced it wrong. They're gonna kill me. uh St. Louis,
Either way you go,
Missouri.
you're wrong on that one.
It's fine. Yeah, everything's fine. It's a great city. I've driven through there. I love it. It's definitely St. Louis. Anyways, qualifying, we had in first place, or starting for pole rather, Will Power, followed by Marcus Ericsson, Joseph Newgarden, Scott McLaughlin, and Alex Palou rounding out the top 5. Finishing out the bottom 5 in the top 10, we had Scott Dixon, Pato O'Ward, Takuma Sato, Devlin Dave Francesco, and Alexander Rossi. What do you think about this race? It's a short track.
Yeah, this race was interesting. It started out really boring.
Yep.
Because most of the appeal of this race, this was actually it ended up being one of my favorite races of the season at the end. It started out, and the whole appeal of this race was the threat of weather, and so
right.
There was rain on the radar all around the track, and basically people were trying to sync up their strategies to match the rain. Either, like some people said, went on a strategy where they thought it was going to rain, and then the race wasn't going to be resumed because it just kept raining. Some people went on strategies where it was going to rain, stop the race, and then the race would be resumed afterwards to finish. And then some people went on the strategy for it's not going to rain at all, let's just go to the end of the race. So it ended up being quite the mix, grab bag of strategies. It was really fascinating, but in the first, I think it was 144 green flag laps before anything really happened.
Yeah, it was really weird. I don't want to say I was getting bored, because it was still pretty good racing, but after the Nashville Grand Prix, I was getting a little kind of wondering when the caution would come out. It didn't happen until almost halfway through the race.
Yeah, Will Power commanded the early part of the race, and he held off Ericsson for the first quarter of it or so. But then O'Ward and McLaughlin made their way up through the field to challenge for the lead after that. Pretty soon after, about, I'd say, 90-ish laps into the race, the threat of rain started to show up on the radar, and this is when the strategy calls all started to diverge from each other. Finally, about 50 laps after, all of the strategy calls had already been made, basically. On lap 144, Jack Harvey got into the wall and brought out a full course caution as he made his way back to the pits slowly.
Very different strategy from the other drivers. He decided to end the race before the rain got there.
Right. Yeah, it's a bold one. I don't think it quite worked out for him, though. So half of the cars ended up pitting under caution in anticipation of the rain, and half the cars stayed out. The rain ended up taking longer to show up than anticipated, which benefited those who pitted under yellow. On lap 177, Newgarden took the lead, but was then undercut by Scott McLaughlin in second on lap 209. This was a 260 lap race, by the way. On lap 217, the race was red flagged due to rain. It finally showed up, and basically on ovals, the second they see a raindrop, it's a red flag because the speeds that everybody's going at, there's no no margin for error.
Yep, and the way that they're shaped, they don't really evacuate water super well. I mean, it just
pulls up
slope,
on the bottom,
so it just creates a waterfall and pulls up on bottom. Yeah.
Yep. So the race, actually, it only rained for about 15 minutes, and then it took them about 2 hours to dry the track. After that, they had these trucks with these giant, industrial, blowers just fanning off the track, and it took a long time for them to dry it out. But finally, about 2 hours later, the race did resume, and McLaughlin and Newgarden were the leaders at that point. They were on fresher tires. Fresh-ish tires. Fresher tires than people like Will Power, who kind of got the short end of the stick on strategy, and everyone who went in with him. I don't know, there was so much strategy confusion, it's hard to keep track. So they had fresh-ish tires. Most of the field had older tires, and then David Malukas had just pitted, I think, the lap before the red flag came out. So he had a massive advantage in terms of tire and fuel compared to the rest of the field on the restart. And so after the restart, he made his way all the way from 5th to 2nd, and he had a massive Titanic battle with Scott McLaughlin at the end of the race. That was for about 20 laps.
That was the highlight for me, watching them just trade back and forth.
Yeah.
Even through the corners, they were getting pretty gutsy. Going up pretty high out of the line just to try to keep in it.
Yep. Yeah, David Malukas has been definitely turning heads and impressing people. He's in the running for Rookie of the Year. I don't have the stats for that up. I should have done that. But maybe at the end of the season we can talk about that. I know he's definitely in the running for Rookie of the Year. I believe Christian Lundgaard is in the lead of that right now, but if Malukas keeps putting up podiums, he's gonna overtake Lundgaard pretty quickly. But he's definitely had some good races, especially over the last few, where he's been top 10. And for a rookie, a top 10 finish is really good. And so to have multiple and even now a podium is a very, very successful first season in the sport for him. All right, so the results of this race, we had Joseph Newgarden pulling out the win, followed by David Malukas and Scott McLaughlin on the podium. 4 and 5 were Pato O'Ward and Takuma Sato. 6 through 10 were Will Power, Marcus Ericsson, Scott Dixon, Alex Palou, and Graham Rahal. 11 through 15 were Colton Herta, Devlin DeFrancesco, Roman Grosjean, Jimmy Johnson, and Helio Castro-Neves. 16 through 20 were Felix Rosenqvist, Kyle Kirkwood, Dalton Kellett, Christian Lundgaard, and Simon Pagenaud. 21 through 25 were Callum Ilott, Ed Carpenter, Connor Daly, Jack Harvey, and Alex Rossi. And then we had one DNF, and that was Rinus VeeKay because of an electrical failure.
What a change from Nashville to St. Louis.
Yeah.
That was, yeah.
We had one crash, which was Jack Harvey, but that didn't end his race.
And we had an electrical DNF.
Yeah, and that was just, he was saying in an interview during the race that his dashboard on his wheel just froze, and so he couldn't see any of his shift lights. He couldn't hear the shift tone. He couldn't see what gear he was in, let alone, the amount of fuel he had in the car, oil pressure, all the stuff that you kind of need to know.
Yeah.
And then, so he pulled into the pits, and they couldn't fix the problem in time. So he unfortunately did not finish the race. But I can only imagine that'd be like terrifying, especially kind of on an oval. Well, it'd be terrifying no matter where you are, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I feel like would the gearing be that much of a problem? Those engines have to be loud enough that you can hear them a little bit, even from your helmet and your cockpit.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, he said he was doing it all by feel, which
Yeah.
I could see, but at the same time, like, you have the shift lights and the beep, and so regardless, I think you're going to be at the very least a little slower without that information.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be a
The
little more
big thing is not
tentative,
having
I would think.
access. Yeah, not having access to other telemetry like your. I don't know if they run tire temps like they do in F1, but your tire info and your engine temps, your fuel. That's a big one, and then your
Yeah.
lap counter too on the 260 lap race. It's
Yeah,
really
you're going
hard
to
to
lose
count to
track real quick.
260.
Yeah, I think the fuel would be the big one on an oval, because that's kind of the whole big part of the race. It's not just driving around in circles. It's one of the biggest goals is hitting your fuel target every lap.
Yep.
And so without that information, it's almost impossible. And this was a especially tricky race on fuel. Will Power said that he was lifting and coasting into turn 1 from the start finish line, which the start finish line was probably, I don't know, 200 feet, maybe more before the turn.
That's crazy.
Yeah. There was a lot of lift and coast, lots of fuel saving in this race, just because the amount of strategy variables were ridiculous. So it didn't. The first part of the race was not too exciting, but the second half, especially after the red flag, the restart was awesome to watch. Very entertaining.
Yeah, definitely one to watch from your TV. I think getting stuck for 2 hours not watching any racing after 15 minutes of rain, I would have gotten a little tired of that if I was actually there.
Yeah, because everybody had to get out of the stands too because there was lightning. So like, you have to leave your seat, go sit under the bleachers probably.
Yep, and then come back to a soaked, drenched seat.
Yep.
And then wait for a couple hours.
Wait a couple hours, and then it was like 36 race laps, which takes it was like 15 minutes, I think. So, waited 2 hours for 15 more minutes of racing. But, that's how it goes. Definitely can't be running on ovals in the wet, and lightning is definitely a threat when it comes to all of those machines and electronics and everything on the track, and also the people in the stands in the big metal bleachers.
Yeah, these those lightning storms in the Midwest are no joke.
No joke, for sure. I've seen some pretty brutal stuff. One time I was out in Colorado, and it was this crazy flash flood thunderstorm, and they were saying on the news there were like 650 strikes in Denver per second, or per minute, I mean. It was like wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, they got lightning a little bit different over there than what we're used to over on the West Coast, but it's definitely still a major part of the sport, especially during the summer. All right, so championship standings after that random tangent. We have in first place still, with 482 points, Will Power leading the championship. He's only 3 points ahead of his teammate, Joseph Newgarden. And pretty close behind, we also have Scott Dixon, Marcus Ericsson, and Alex Palou. I would say the top 5 here are probably the only ones that really have a shot at the championship still. It's looking pretty good for Power and Newgarden. They've got really good momentum. At this point in the season, Marcus Ericsson's kind of dropping back after he led for a few races. And then Scott Dixon kind of came out of nowhere. He had a kind of rough first half of the season, but he's definitely come back and is now in very good contention spot for the title. All right. So that's kind of all there is in terms of interesting stuff. Updates in the championship for IndyCar. Let's move on to our overtake of the week. I gave this to Philippe Albuquerque on Olivier Jarvis at Road America in the IMSA race. He came around. They were battling each other through traffic. I think Albuquerque had to overtake like 3 cars to get this one spot because he had to pass a bunch of GTD cars. So he was weaving through traffic and then ended up wheel to wheel with Olivier Jarvis down a straight. Jarvis pushed him off the road, but Albuquerque was not phased, kept his foot flat on the floor, and just made the overtake with 2 wheels on the grass.
Yeah. Like I said, IMSA drivers are literally just different.
Yeah, that's a different breed right there.
Yeah, IMSA always has at least a couple great overtakes every race.
Yeah, IMSA racing is very fun to watch, I will say. It's just hard to sit there for 6 hours, you know?
Yeah, that's where the half-hour highlights really comes in handy.
Exactly. But yeah, so I love watching IMSA. I just kind of tune in when I see a race is on. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to watch. Lots of good overtaking. The drivers are absolutely insane. Yeah, so that's our overtake of the week. And that actually concludes this first part of episode 16. So thank you everybody so much for listening to part 1 of this episode. If you enjoyed it, leave a like or rating on the platform you listened on. It really helps us out. Make sure to stay tuned for part 2 of this episode coming up next, and we'll see you there.
We'll be right back.